The night my biggest rival asked me to spend one night with her, I laughed in her face. Not because the idea was funny, but because I knew exactly what would happen if I said yes. By Monday morning, we would be back in the office pretending nothing had happened, competing for the same promotion, tearing apart each other's presentations, and acting like our hearts had never been involved. At least, that was the lie I told myself. Her name was Claire Morgan, and for 3 years, she had been the one person at work who could make me question every decision I made. She was brilliant, stubborn, ambitious, and impossibly calm under pressure. I was the same, which was probably why we clashed so violently. Whenever our manager announced a new project, Claire and I immediately became competitors. If I finished a presentation at midnight, she somehow had a better one by 11. If I landed a major client, she would win the next one. Our coworkers joked that we hated each other so much that one day someone would have to physically separate us. But nobody knew what happened after the office lights went dark. Because sometimes, when everyone else had gone home, Claire and I would sit across from each other in the conference room, exhausted and strangely honest. We never talked about our rivalry then. We talked about our families, our failures, the dreams we had abandoned, and the fear that maybe we weren't as successful as everyone thought we were. Those moments always ended before either of us could admit they meant something. So before we continue, if you believe kindness can change people, that second chances are real, and that sometimes the person we judge the most is the person who needs understanding the most, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel for more heart-touching stories. The night everything changed began with rain. A violent storm had trapped us in the office after a charity event our company had sponsored. Everyone else had already left, but Claire stayed behind to finish some paperwork. I stayed because I had promised myself I would beat her to the deadline. Around midnight, I found her standing beside the window, staring at the city lights through the rain. She looked different without her usual armor. Her shoulders were tired. Her hair had fallen loose from its neat style, and there was something painfully lonely in her expression. I almost walked away. Instead, I asked if she was okay. She turned toward me and smiled faintly, but it wasn't her usual confident smile. She told me that she had just received news that her father was sick again. She had been trying to hold everything together for months, pretending she could handle work, family, and life without ever breaking. For once, I didn't see my rival. I saw a woman who was exhausted. I sat beside her. We didn't compete that night. We simply talked. She told me she was terrified that if she slowed down, even for a moment, everything she had built would collapse. I admitted that I understood because I had spent years believing my worth depended on being the best person in every room. Neither of us realized how much we had in common until that conversation. Then Claire looked at me for a long moment and said something that left me speechless. She said that maybe we had spent so much time fighting because being close to each other felt more dangerous than being enemies. I should have changed the subject. Instead, I asked what she meant. She looked away. Then she made the strangest proposal of my life. She suggested that we stop pretending for one night. No promises. No relationship. No future. Just one night where neither of us had to be the ambitious employee, the rival, or the person everyone expected us to be. One night. Then back to hating each other. I stared at her, certain I had misunderstood. But she wasn't joking. There was vulnerability in her eyes that frightened me more than the proposal itself. I told her that arrangements like that never stayed simple when feelings were involved. She smiled sadly and said feelings were exactly what she was trying to avoid. And somehow, despite every warning in my mind, I said yes. We left the office together, but nothing about that night became what either of us expected. There was no wild escape from reality, no dramatic transformation. Instead, we drove through the rain, stopped at a 24-hour cafe, drank terrible coffee, and talked until sunrise. We laughed about the ridiculous things we had done to beat each other at work. We admitted how often we had secretly admired the other's talent. We told stories we had never shared with anyone else. By dawn, I realized the truth. I didn't want one night. I wanted every ordinary morning after it. But Claire had already built a wall around her heart, and I knew better than to knock it down without permission. Monday morning arrived too quickly. At exactly 8:03, Claire walked into the office wearing her professional expression again. She placed a folder on my desk and reminded me that our presentation was due that afternoon. No mention of the cafe. No mention of the rain. No mention of the night we had spent together. She was back to being my rival. And I pretended I was fine with that. For several weeks, we returned to our old routine. We argued over budgets. We challenged each other's ideas. We competed for clients. To everyone else, nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Now, when Claire walked into a room, I noticed when she looked tired. When she skipped lunch, I quietly left food on her desk. When she received difficult news about her father, I stayed late without asking questions. And whenever she thought nobody was watching, she would look at me with an expression that made it impossible to believe our arrangement had meant nothing. Then came the promotion. There was one executive position available, and Claire and I were the final two candidates. For 3 years, I had wanted that promotion. It could change my career. It could pay off my debts. It could finally prove to my younger brother, who had always believed in me, that all the sacrifices had been worth something. But Claire needed it too. Her father's medical expenses were growing, and she had quietly taken on most of the responsibility. The competition became brutal. We were both exhausted. Then, 2 days before the final presentation, I discovered something that could have destroyed Claire's chances. One of her financial projections contained a serious mistake. If I exposed it, I would almost certainly win. For years, I had dreamed about standing above her professionally. But as I stared at the numbers, I remembered the woman sitting beside me in that rain-soaked cafe. The woman who had admitted she was scared. The woman who had trusted me enough to show me the part of herself nobody else saw. I corrected the mistake. Then I walked into the executive meeting and presented her work as accurately as I could. I didn't sabotage her. I didn't need to. Because I finally understood that winning against Claire wasn't the same thing as winning in life. After the meeting, I returned to my office expecting disappointment. Instead, Claire was waiting. She had discovered what I had done. She stood silently in the doorway, holding the corrected report. For once, she wasn't angry. She was crying. She told me she had spent years believing kindness was weakness because every time she trusted someone, they eventually used it against her. She said she had proposed that ridiculous one-night arrangement because she thought keeping everything temporary would protect her heart. But it hadn't. She had fallen for me long before she understood what was happening. And I finally admitted that I had too. Then came the twist neither of us expected. The promotion went to someone else. Our manager called us into his office and explained that the executives had noticed something neither of us had expected. They had seen how we worked together during the final presentation. Instead of fighting each other, we had protected the project, the client, and the company. They offered us something better. They created a new leadership position for both of us, asking us to run the department together. Claire looked at me. I laughed. She laughed too. For the first time, our laughter wasn't hiding anger or nervousness. It was relief. Months later, Claire's father improved enough to return home, and she stopped measuring her life only by promotions and deadlines. I learned to stop treating every challenge like a battle. We still argued at work. We still disagreed. Sometimes we drove each other completely crazy. But now, when one of us walked into a room, the other didn't see an enemy. We saw home. One evening, almost a year after that rainy night, we stood outside the same cafe where everything had changed. Claire looked at me and smiled before admitting that she had been thinking about our original agreement. One night. Then back to hating each other. She said she had finally realized the problem with that plan. It assumed that love could be controlled by a deadline. I told her I had never believed that. Then I took her hand. There was no grand proposal, no audience, no perfect movie moment. Just two people who had once mistaken competition for strength and distance for safety. Sometimes love doesn't arrive like fireworks. Sometimes it appears quietly in the person who stays when you're difficult, who believes in you when winning would be easier, and who chooses kindness when nobody would blame them for choosing revenge. Claire and I never needed one perfect night. We needed the courage to admit that we wanted a lifetime of ordinary ones. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe for more stories about kindness, hope, and unexpected love. And before you go, comment, "Kindness wins," if you believe that sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating the person standing across from you, but choosing to stand beside them. Because the person you call your rival today might secretly be the person your heart has been waiting for all along.